the Chinese government and the Chinese military have announced certain capabilities and certain organizations within their structure that are clearly aimed at cyber warfare, doctrine, cyber operations, their plans for any future conflict.
Thank you. America must also face the rapidly growing threat from cyber attacks. Now, we know hackers steal people's identities and infiltrate private emails. We know foreign countries and companies swipe our corporate secrets. Now our enemies are also seeking the ability to sabotage our power grid, our financial institutions, our air traffic control systems. We cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security and our economy.
我们刚才看到的是美国总统奥巴马在本周二发表的国情咨文中的一段，他讲到了美国正在受到迅速增长的来自外国的网络攻击。虽然他没有提到任何国家的名字，但是只要对网络攻击有些许了解的人都不得不马上想到了一个国家——中国。事实上，美国最新的情报分析已经指出，美国已经成为外国网络间谍攻击的主要对象，其中绝大部分网络攻击来自中共，数量大，时间长。这一集的事实关心节目，我们就来和美国传统基金会外交政策研究中心的主任、前美国副助理国务卿、五角大楼的高级官员、美国第5特种部队的长官一起来探讨来自中国的网络攻击。它对美国现在和未来的潜在杀伤力有多大？美国又将如何应对？下面我们首先来看一下最近美国情报机关出炉的一份报告。进入2月份以来，美国主流媒体广泛报道了一份由美国国家情报评估做出的报告。这份报告没有向大众公布，但是几家主流媒体得以引述报告中的部分内容。据《华盛顿邮报》报道，这份报告的结论代表了美国情报界的广泛共识，显示了在过去5年中，中共主要对美国在能源、金融、信息科技、航空和汽车领域加强了网络攻击。报告没有公布美国因此遭受的经济损失有多大，但据有关专家说，这方面的损失估计有数十亿美元。曾经一度只是美国情报和军事机构关注的网络间谍活动，现在已经日益成为对美国经济利益的直接威胁。除中共外，报告还指出，来自俄国、以色列和法国的网络黑客也试图窃取美国的经济情报，但与来自中共的网络间谍行为和攻击数量相比，逊色得多。此外，根据全球最大的分布式计算平台阿卡麦技术公司的调查显示，从2012年7月到9月，全世界所有被发现的电脑攻击中有1/3来自中国。中共为获取西方技术，通过各种非正当手段窃取情报，这并非是第一回。同时，我们也要承认，各个国家都有间谍活动，包括美国。但是，为什么现在很多国家已经形成了一个共识，就是中共是网络攻击的最大黑手呢？除了数量之外，来自中国的网络间谍活动还有其他方面更令人担忧吗？从下面几个近年来的典型案例中，我们应该能够看出各国政府，尤其是美国政府担心的原因。Titan Rain 泰坦雨是美国政府给一系列自2003年开始的有组织的对美国电脑系统进行攻击的行为起的一个名字。这些攻击至少持续了3年，攻击方来自中国，攻击对象包括美国国务院、国防部、能源部和国土安全部，还包括军方的项目承包商。泰坦雨行动偷走了美国10到20兆字节的数据。2007年，五角大楼宣布，来自中国的黑客侵入了美国国防部的电脑系统。因为其技术和行为的成熟复杂，五角大楼相信这次的攻击来自中国政府。2009年，位于加拿大的信息战监控组织发现了一个有史以来最严重的网络攻击行为，他们把它起名叫做幽灵网。 幽灵网的指挥和控制设施主要在中国。这种植入性的木马程式对各国驻外使馆、国际组织和媒体单位的1200台电脑进行了即时同步的攻击，被攻击的国家高达103个。2010年以来，数次源自中国的网络间谍攻击，目标被锁定在了世界上主要的石油和天然气公司，其中包括天然气巨擎 BG 公司，还有埃克森美孚公司、皇家荷兰壳牌公司和英国石油公司。最近一段时间，最令美国政府警惕的网络攻击模式，可能要数美国建立在网络通讯平台上的基础设施。就像奥巴马总统在国情咨文中提到的，包括电力网、金融机构、供电系统等等的关乎国家日常运作的基础设施也受到了攻击。在所有这些来自中国的大型的有组织的网络攻击背后，我们都可以看到中国政府的影子，这应该是最令人担心的地方。虽然中共政权直到现在还矢口否认政府参与了任何网络攻击的活动，但是大量的证据显示，网络攻击的源头经常是来自中共军方或者是政府的相关科研单位。有意思的是，他们自己一不小心也暴露了这一点。下面请雪莉为我们播放2段新闻。
好，肖明，这2条新闻呢，一条是来自2011年新唐人的中国禁闻，另一条呢来自同一年英国的天空新闻。我们先来看看新唐人的中国禁闻。
今年7月16日晚10点40分，军事科技出台了一集题为《网络风暴来了》的节目。当节目中的所谓军事专家开始介绍网络攻击手段时，电视画面背景中赫然播放了7秒钟左右的视频。视频清楚地显示中共黑客是如何攻击海外法轮功网站的。视频中，海外的各法轮功网站为中共黑客的主要攻击目标，包括法轮大法在北美、法轮大法网站、明慧网等。画面同时显示，攻击者为中国人民解放军电子工程学院。节目中，所谓的军事专家说，网络攻击的方法很多，
可以安装木马、安装后门系统、这个邮件阻塞等等这些网络上常用的一些破坏方式。
其实中共最早从1999年或者是2000年起就开始攻击法轮功网站，之后呢是越来越猖狂，逐步扩大了攻击的目标。另外，2011年，英国天空新闻的记者呢，也曝光了一个在北京举办的黑客研讨会和中共军方的关系。天空新闻的记者获准采访由一个著名的骇客团体在北京所举办的研讨会。该活动由号称与中共军方有关联的保安公司承办。会中发言者涉及击败 Windows 7和虚拟病毒感染 （Virtual Viruses Infection） 等议题。这个会议还强调骇客和中国政府之间的暧昧关系。一位证实是警察的与会者呢，也表示来此参加研讨会的目的就是要寻找新的技术和资源。
如果我们可以用的话，我们会跟他们再次接触。
这条新闻最后讲到一种噩梦式的情况呢，是有人需要和中国打一场网络战争。那么中国可能针对的就是攻击这个国家的基础设施，比如电力网。听起来真的是非常可怕。小明，
谢谢雪莉。既然这些大型的针对别国军事、商业和基础设施的网络攻击的背后是中共政权，那么我们就不能不去设想中共政权这样做的原因和他想达到的目的。网络攻击是否成了中共经济战略和国防战略的一个重要组成部分呢？下面是我就这些问题对 Steven Bucci 先生的另一段采访。In the past decade, what trend have you seen regarding China's cyber espionage against Western countries, especially the United States?
Well, China has turned out to be one of the most sophisticated and focused countries in pursuing cyber capabilities, and there's been quite a bit of cyber espionage. Most of it that is attributed to China is thought to have a government sponsorship, but of course the government has denied that and said that It is just a lot of hackers that are doing these things that they can't control either. And while I agree China is a victim of a lot of hacking by other players, by people inside China, the level of sophistication and the level of organization of the cyber espionage efforts really could only be attributed to a nation state. And in this case, it's China. So they're quite extensive cyber espionage efforts.
Talking about government-backed cyber espionage, I don't know if we have a centralized database yet, but based on your observation, how large a role has the Chinese government played in directing or coordinating digital attacks aimed at stealing U.S. intellectual property and sabotaging the U.S. infrastructure?
Well, we don't yet have any hard evidence of actual sabotage of the U.S. infrastructure. There have been quite a few operations that have been uncovered, and at least in the United States and Canada and some of the European countries, we hope we've thwarted those efforts that have mostly been information gathering, sort of true espionage operations. The Chinese government and the Chinese military have announced certain capabilities and certain organizations within their structure that are clearly aimed at cyber warfare. In the doctrine of the Chinese military, cyber operations play a prominent role in their plans for any future conflict. So the fact that they are involved in the kind of espionage that would be needed to build a database, to build the capabilities, to do the reconnaissance of other networks is not surprising. But as far as hard evidence of actual attempts to damage U.S. infrastructure, we have not found that, though there has been evidence of some leave-behind malware that could have that capability, but the actual operations essentially have not yet been executed as far as doing physical damage to the networks.
So when we talk about the trend during the past decade, I mean, obviously there's an increase of the cyber espionage, conducted by the Chinese part. Do you think that represents a major strategy shift of the Chinese Communist regime in economic development and defense?
No, I don't think it's a shift. I think it's a strategy that they have been pursuing for at least the last 10 or 15 years. They are using these cyber espionage operations to gather intellectual property, to gather national security data that is allowing them to push forward both their economic development and their military development without the kind of research and development costs that they would have if they did the hard research on their own. It's sort of traditional espionage, but being done with a great deal of cyber enablement. So it's really nothing new, not just for China, but for any big country to try and get the secrets of their competitors and adversaries. And if those secrets are of good enough quality, try and apply them and use them themselves to their own advantage. So cyber espionage as a theory is not anything new, but the volume of it and the skill that the Chinese have shown in executing cyber espionage is fairly unprecedented.
Yeah, especially if they're sabotaging the U.S. infrastructure. I mean, although you said we don't have hard evidence of that, but if that is true, what do you think? That's very worrying, I mean, to everybody. I mean, it just sounds horrible. But what do you think is their ultimate goal if they are really doing these things?
Well, I think their ultimate goal is to pursue their own national interests, the first of which is to gather as much intellectual property as they can to enable their own development. Two, to do as much reconnaissance of U.S. infrastructures as they can, so that, as according to their doctrine, if there is a conflict between our two countries, that they would be in a position to damage or disable some of our capabilities, which are greatly leveraged by our dependence on cyber capabilities. And then lastly, if they can find the kind of vulnerabilities that would allow it to use the knowledge from that reconnaissance to damage those infrastructures. As I say, right now, they have not done that last piece, but it's not surprising because it would frankly hurt the international economy, it would hurt the American economy, and the Chinese economy is tied in a great many ways to the United States. So at this point, it's not in their interest to damage the U.S. infrastructure, but in a future conflict, they might make that decision that it was in their interest and essentially pull that cyber trigger and do that damage at that point.
If they do that in the future, would that be considered an act of war?
I think that clearly could be considered an act of war. I know the United States Department of Defense has made a very general statement that a cyber attack would be considered an act of war, but they very consciously did not define in very strict terms what would be a cyber attack. That is very common in international relations to leave that vague so that an enemy would not know how far they could go before they would receive that kind of response. You don't necessarily want to define that very clearly for your enemies, but if they damage the U.S. infrastructure, I think it would definitely elicit a response.
Well, has the United States been too slow in realizing the cyber threat imposed by China?
It kind of depends on who you're talking to. I think the United States intelligence community, the United States military community is very, very aware and very cognizant of the threat that China plays. But because our infrastructure, particularly our digital infrastructure, is in large measure, some people say 80 to 85% of it actually belongs in the private sector, is not controlled by the government. It's a little hard to really put together the kind of defensive measures that might be necessary. We are in the process of trying to educate the American people in general, and particularly our industry leaders, of this threat, and then help them figure out ways to make the digital infrastructure more secure. We're not quite there yet.
针对美国面临的日益严重的网络攻击，现在美国政府已经开始采取一些应对措施。奥巴马政府宣布，这些措施会包括通过官方渠道正式向中共提出抗议，驱逐涉嫌的中共外交官，收紧对中国人来美旅游和签证发放的限制条款，以及向世贸组织提出投诉。另外，在美国国家评估出台美国受到网络攻击的报告之后，美国总统奥巴马2月12号签署了一份行政命令，旨在帮助关键的美国行业电脑网络免于网络攻击，并催促国会立法采取进一步措施。高级官员说，奥巴马的命令要求在关键的经济领域，比如银行、电力和交通行业，建立一个保护电脑系统的自愿标准。他也指示美国国防部和情报机构跟这些公司分享这些公司受到攻击的信息数据。虽然大家都认识到了美国在保护网络安全方面需要有所动作，但是各方对具体如何做却分歧不小。奥巴马的行政命令已经讨论了好几个月，并且跟私营公司进行了多次困难的谈判。私营公司一方面对政府增加监管有所不满，另外一方面也对和政府机构分享自己被攻击的数据有所顾虑。那么，到底在应对网络攻击方面，美国是否有切实可行的方案呢？请看我对布什先生的采访。Talking about counteracting China's cyber espionage against the U.S., the Obama administration is considering options such as formal protest, the expulsion of diplomatic personnel, the imposition of travel and visa restrictions, and complaints to the WTO. So my question is, how well do you think these measures will work in stopping China's attacks?
I'm, to be honest with you, a little bit dubious that they will be sufficient. You have to take diplomatic steps. You have to let another nation state know that you're aware of their operations, if you will, and tell them to please stop. That doesn't stop espionage of the old-fashioned kind or the new kind, generally. So then you have to take other steps. And I think the United States is doing that, trying to take both the technological measures, the human measures as far as educating our own personnel, and then having our own operations through the different parts of the U.S. government to try and dissuade China from taking these actions. Hopefully we'll be successful and things will back off a bit and be a little more regularized. But right now they're pretty extensive operations, and it's getting a lot of people in the U.S. government pretty concerned.
Another thing is, how effective do you think the President's executive order on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity will be?
To be honest with you, I don't think the executive order was the right thing to do. In the United States, we have a great debate as to what is the right way to improve cybersecurity. The President's order is based primarily on what we would call a regulatory solution, trying to establish specific standards for the protection of our infrastructure. The problem with that is that regulatory standards are very static. Once you set them and you publish the regulations and you have people checking, that really doesn't work in the cyber world. The cyber world is very dynamic, and if you set the standard here, then the hackers, whether they be a nation state or individuals, know they only have to get a little bit above that and that they've defeated those means. We need to come up with a better way to do that, and while I applaud the President's intent to try and make things more secure, I think it's not the right solution. It's too little, and it's aimed in the wrong place. So hopefully the debate will continue and we'll get some of those better security procedures in place soon.
If we consider the whole situation, if we consider the fight over cyber security is a war, do you think the U.S. is fighting an unbalanced war because the Chinese Communist regime is basically able to do whatever it wants and needs, but the U.S. is largely on the defense side, and from time to time, even that defense cannot be played out smoothly?
There is an argument that being in a democracy where our infrastructure does not belong to the government and having to worry about things like the privacy and rights of our citizens, it does put you at some degree of disadvantage to a government that can do whatever it wants with every asset in the country. But it's a disadvantage we're willing to accept because of the benefits we receive from having that system. I wouldn't say we're totally at the complete disadvantage. The United States also pursues offensive cyber means. We have the U.S. Cyber Command, which has the capability to use these digital means in the same way that some of our adversaries are using them against us. So the United States is not without a capability in this area, which I think the Chinese government and the Chinese military needs to keep in mind and factor into their decisions on how they go forward, because there could be a price to pay for some of the things that have been going on.
中国互联网迅速的发展和中共现在发起的这种强势的网络攻击，让我想到一句话：成也萧何，败也萧何。虽然网络间谍活动让中共在经济发展和国防方面都占据了一定的战略优势，但是技术的发展也不可避免地带来了危险。就像 Google CEO Schmidt 先生所说的，用高科技的通讯设备武装起来的民众和实行高压的政府，这种组合是非常不稳定的。 就像脸书在埃及引发了一场革命一样，他预见在下一个10年中，中国就会发生某种类型的革命。如果真如他所说的，那么那个时候全世界也许可以松一口气了，因为一个改变了的中国应该不会再对全世界发起占总量1/3的网络攻击了。